Whoa, legendary!
We're here. We're live. Greetings. My name is Ben Brode. This is
I'm Dean Ayala.
and our names are on the screen there.
Oh,
Dean. So we're here to do something we've never done before as the Hearthstone team, which is a live Q&A. And it's a little bit of an experiment, and it's going to be somewhat different than the way we've communicated in the past because I think this kind of thing is useful. I think doing Q&As and talking directly to the community over a video format can be very helpful, and I think we should do more of it in general. But as we communicate more, it means the times when there are announcements as we communicate go down, because the number of times we're announcing things is going to be staticky, and so a lot of the time when we do more frequent communication, it'll be focused on what is our philosophies? What do we feel about things? Do we think that's a good idea or a bad idea? And kind of gut checking those things with the community to find out, how do you guys feel about our priorities and whether our design philosophies are good ideas, or if we need to take a second look at what we're thinking. So there's going to be a lot of that today, and I think this could be a great opportunity to kind of chat with people and get some feedback. So please ask us your questions. We have some questions here from the blog and from Twitter and other forums. So we're going to start with some of those, and you can ask your questions in chat, and we have people feeding them to us live.
Yeah, we have a bunch of questions that we got from a lot of different places in the Hearthstone community, and then we're taking questions from chat here, like Ben said. We've done a lot of communication, I think, on places like Reddit and Twitter, and places like this I think are really awesome, where we can get a lot of the messages out to a wider reaching audience.
So just to give you some context of what kinds of questions I think we'll be good at answering, I'm the game director. Dean is a game designer on the Final Design team. Final Design is responsible for making sure the cards are fun and balanced and clear. So that's not a full representation of everything. So we'll hopefully we'll be able to answer a really wide swath. I think probably a lot of questions me and Dean will be able to answer great, but I'll let you know if there's something that is better for somebody else. I think a good thing to, before I answer our very first question, I want to kick us off by talking about what kind of communication is good communication and what kind of communication is maybe lacking communication. I think
less good.
I think the expectations of questions and answers should not be, hey, I have a question, tell me you're going to do the thing I want you to do. Sometimes we will, but I think this is not the forum for that. This is the forum for kind of aligning, right? Figuring out what is the Hearthstone team thinking. Sometimes without knowing that, we seem maybe like we're doing things that are random or don't make sense. But with a little bit of insight, hopefully things make a little more sense, or you can help us, let us know when it still doesn't. We need to change our direction. So to kick things off, I wanted to talk about two topics that have been, I think, big in the community recently. The first is the new player experience, and the second is the ranked play ladder. Just to kick us off, I think there was a lot of questions about that, and then we'll start taking live questions and the other questions that I've seen. So the new player experience. A lot of the discussion around the new player experience is, I think, related to the win rates and the matchmaking for new players as they get into the ranked ladder, which it has some, I think, pretty serious weaknesses when it comes to that particular thing, which is welcoming new players to the ranked ladder. So just to back up a little bit about kind of talking about our holistic new player experience, we have the 6 introductory missions. Actually, those do a great job at funneling players through, giving them a fun experience, teaching them the game. We have a lot of players coming to Hearthstone who have never played a collectible card game before, so teaching some of those mechanics is important. And once they get through there, the vast majority of players go to the basic AI decks and start unlocking classes and unlocking more basic cards. Some players go into the casual matchmaker, and the minority of new players go to ranked. And it's those players that are having the toughest time. They are, because the ranked matchmaker matches players based on the number of stars you have. So it doesn't care how well you did last season or the season before, if you haven't played in 6 months, or if you're brand new. It says, oh, here's the ranked 25 players who have 0 stars. Let's match those guys together and see if we can find somebody with the exact same number of stars. There's a couple nice things that are kind of side effects of that certainly I don't think are worth the problems we're having. But one nice thing is that because it's match made exclusively on stars, if you get better at all, whether you make your deck better or if you learn to stop fireballing your opponent in the face on turn 4, then you immediately see an increase in ranks, because now you're playing against people who are your average gets better, and so you can feel the power increase via your skill or deck more clearly in a world where there is no MMR. Because if there's an MMR, we're going to try and get you to 50% matchmaking all the time, and so an increase in skill or deck is going to just get you to 50% matchmaking again. So, but even still, the ranked matchmaking experience isn't what I think we would say is the ideal experience for a brand new player. Casual, we spent a lot of time trying to make that better. I don't think that was very good either when we launched Hearthstone, but we've done a couple things to help make that better. One is we exclusively match new players against other new players, and we do that for some period of time, but also we don't want players who decide they want to buy a lot of Hearthstone packs to then kind of infect that pool of players with tons of legendaries. So the players, there is some collection component to that, to keep players with similar size collections who are new playing in a pool together. And then also, just because there is an MMR and we adjust it based on whether you win or lose and who you've won or lost against, we try and quickly get you to a 50% win ratio as quick as possible in the casual matchmaker. And actually, there were some bugs in our matchmaker early on, which we fixed and readjusted kind of where we drop players in along the curve. There's a curve of players, and how do we drop you in at a place where you're playing against, you're probably not average when you start, so dropping you lower, but then, if you keep funneling players into the low end, the curve starts shifting because that's the entry point. So there's some complex algorithms that we have been working on and are continuing to work on to try and make sure that the curve of skill matches where the new player insertion point goes in casual. But all this to say is that we've had great success in the casual matchmaker, increasing the new player win rate over time. It's gone up about 15% over the last year or 2 years. So I think there's some successes we've had with the new player experience. But there are many places for improvement. But our biggest area for improvement is that ranked initial experience, which I think is a good segue into the ranked ladder. Sorry, Dean. Just kinda,
no worries. All right. I'll be answering questions soon.
Which is, I think it's important to say, I think, what is working about the ranked ladder and what is not working about the ranked ladder, and to talk about a little bit where our experiments are going on right now and where we're looking to make improvements. So I think what's working about the ranked ladder is it's very clear how the system works. If I'm ranked 13 and 2 stars, I can see how many stars I need. I know exactly I need to win 2 more games in order to make it to rank 12. If I lose 3 games, I'll go down a rank. It's very clear. There isn't some behind the scenes calculation that gives you some 3-digit number at the end of your match that isn't clear how that was created. I think that is a benefit of the system, is the clarity of it. Also, I mentioned earlier how clear your increases in skill are mapped to increases in rank. As you get better, you do feel like now suddenly you're winning more games on the ladder. Some things I think are not working well are the feeling of grindiness. Right? We reset every month, and we reset you quite a bit, and it feels the same every month. And why? besides the ranked rewards, and just because I want to play anyway to do my quests or whatever, should I keep playing on the ladder to try and get a higher rank every month? That's just a feeling I think the community has, and I think we all share that exact same feeling.
Yes.
Those are, and the new player issue that I mentioned as well. So those are some of the major issues I think that are, and there's a lot of kind of places to tackle them. So I'll say that one of the first things that we're looking at is, I guess I should say there's kind of two phases I think to approach the ladder. Number one is, can we make it better using the same system? Can we do small things that will reduce the feeling of grindiness or in some way that are not holistic entire system changes? And then as a second phase, I think it's totally worthwhile to look at the entire system and think, are there more dramatic things that we can be doing to kind of tackle these things from a whole different angle? So as far as the first phase, how do we make it better just right now, essentially, is we're looking at increasing the number of bonus stars, because that will essentially help not reset players as far. I guess there are kind of two options. One, we can make seasons longer, but I think that the unit of time of a month is a memorable unit. Different units of times are harder to remember when the season started and end, but that combined with a large resets, that has that helps with that feeling of grindiness. So if we miss the drop down smaller, then maybe a month-long reset doesn't feel as bad. So we're looking at increasing the number of bonus stars. That should also hopefully increase the number of players at higher and middle ranks, which will take more players out of the rank 20 zone and then kind of make that problem a little bit better for new players. So that's one thing we're looking at. Another thing we're looking at is what the effects of breakpoints in the ladder are. So what happens if we say, look, if you hit rank 15, 10, 5, you cannot go below those ranks? What does that do to... Here's some of the metrics we're looking at. How many legend players end up in legend at the end of the season? We don't want everyone to be a legend player and have 30 digits on the legend counter. I think that devalues that rank and makes it less usable. So we have to make sure that these changes, in general, are not hyperinflationary over time, but also keep the number of legend players. I mean, I think all of them will have some inflation there, but don't triple it or quadruple it or things like that. So we're looking at that. We are looking at the win streak. Right now, win streaks go until rank 5 and stop. And part of our thinking there originally was that, look, if you're going to get the legend, you need to do it legit. We don't want streaks to be the reason that people get the legend. I'm not sure that that is a feeling that is going to end up happening if we do actually go ahead and kind of make win streaks go the whole path. We need to figure out what that does to the inflation of the legend rank, but I think it makes the system simpler, which is nice, but also makes that experience of grindiness a little bit lower in the ranks 5 to legend category. So those are some of the opportunities that I think we have to explore. We are doing modeling. We've already done some simulations. We have a meeting on Wednesday to go over all that stuff and kind of make a plan of attack with Hiram and Chris and some of the systems designers, and try and figure out what are the list of things that we should do and what things we want to try later. Maybe we do some subset of those at first to try some things out. And then we also have plans going, like I said, to think about phase 2 and what that would look like. So anyway, that's all the stuff we're thinking about. You guys can help us by gut checking that stuff. Let us know, are there things that are good things to be looking at that we should be looking at? I'm sure I've missed something. But let us know about all that stuff, and we'll keep testing and let you know when we got all ready for ship. Okay, those are the two major topics I had going into all this stuff. So I'm ready to take some questions from the live audience. Okay, here's our first question. From the Hearthstone community. A while ago, you mentioned working on Arena to make it more balanced and a more enjoyable experience. Can you tell us a bit more about your current progress and plans today? Dean, that's a great question for you.
It is. I'd love to talk about that. So we're doing a lot of different things with Arena right now. We have a lot of long-term goals, a lot of things to do with systems like progression and matchmaking and measuring yourself against other players. There's a lot of stuff that we're thinking about. That's more of a long-term thing that we're really looking to do. Right now, in the short term, there's tons of stuff that we're thinking about doing right now. So we're thinking about making Arena standard. There's a lot of really cool things in Arena are when you pull a Sledge Belcher from Naxxramas and really value that. But at the same time, a lot of our synergies live within our sets. Like, it would be cool if Mean Streets released and you had a chance of building a J deck a little bit more likely than you are now. And also, when you have a card pool that is 1,000 cards in building, every time a new set comes out, it's a little bit harder for that new set to make an impact when there's so many sets in the pool. So something we're looking at doing right now is making Arena standard. Also, we are thinking about increasing or decreasing the amount of commons that you get, just balancing out the amount of commons and rares and epics that you get. So when you see a card like Firelance Portal or like Flame Strike or like Abyssal Enforcer, you're not looking at a single card and thinking that this single card is going to warp the entire Arena meta. So I think that when you're seeing cards not 2 or 3 times on average, that just leads to sort of a better experience. Like, the decks that you see in Arena and the decks that you build in Arena are quite a bit different than one another. Something else that we're excited to talk about is starting in early February, we're going to release the top 100 rankings for Arena, very similar to how we do with Constructed. It's the first time we're doing it, so right now the plan is over a minimum amount of 30 runs, the highest wins on average per run. So that's a lot of runs. So we're looking for a lot of feedback. Is that the right way to do it? Is there a more advanced statistical way to measure players? But I think that after looking at statistics for the past few months, that particular metric, when we've looked at it, seems like a good measurement of who our best Arena players are. So all of those things are something that we're really excited to do. I think we're also going to decrease the amount of the neutral, classic, and basic cards. A lot of those cards are cards like River Crocolisk, cards like Magma Rager. There's a lot of minions in general in Arena. That when you look at constructed decks, there's more of a 50-50 split between spells and minions, and I think that is a good split. And while we don't want Arena to feel like constructed, it's good when the best way to play Arena isn't to always play something on 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and basically depend on the fact that because these swing cards like Shadow Madness and Dragonfire Potion and Excavated Evil, they're so rare that you don't really have to play around them. You're just sort of playing minions and hoping that your opponent doesn't have these things. So we're gonna try to increase the amount of cards that are swinging the game back and forth, less cards like River Crocolisk that where you're just playing turn by turn. And hopefully that'll, be a better Arena experience for everybody. So we're looking at doing a ton of new things, and I'm excited to do that pretty soon here.
And when you say looking to do a couple new these things, we're like, some of them are actually implemented, and we are trying to find the right patch to get them out, right? Okay,
Yes.
right.
A lot of things that we've already tested. Like Ben said, when you say looking to do new things, they're already in the game. We're already testing them. We already have a really good feel for what's fun to draft and what's fun to play. So that should be being announced soon.
Yeah, we've been testing a lot of things, and those ones are the ones that we're most excited about. I'll say about the standard Arena thing is that I think it's the kind of thing that we're in general, all this stuff. We don't know if we're making the right decisions. We hope we're making good decisions, but we're gonna put it out there and see how it feels. There's something different about live testing in a real environment than in internal testing. So we'll see how that feels to players and what you guys think about it. But we could see continual change in the Arena, I think. I don't think that's...
Getting feedback is totally awesome because in the past we've been very restricted on what we can do, and now we have a bunch of new tools that allow us to do all kinds of new stuff with Arena. So this is how we're starting, and we're really looking for feedback on what you guys think should change or should not change, and hopefully it leads to a better experience.
All right. We have another question here from @RoxBeats. If you decided to go the route of moving classic basic cards to Wild, would you ever consider moving cards like Blade Flurry and Molten Giant to Wild and undoing the nerfs? So this is in reference to some comments we've made recently about the standard format and whether or not it is set up to succeed long term by continually being fresh and exciting. It's a format that is designed so that our old format was just essentially Wild. We just kept adding cards to it, and each additional set we add has more competition. And so the amount of change in the meta that was occurring when we released new sets was lower and lower over time. So the standard format kind of eliminates that problem. We still have the Wild format for players who are aren't as worried about the meta changing frequently and want the experience of playing with all kinds of different cards, maybe more deck diversity because there's so many different cards. But for standard, that change is very important. And because there are 2 evergreen sets, which I think have really big value to have there for returning players and to set an iconic baseline of cards that feel like great Warcraft fantasy content, I think the existence of those puts at risk the whole promise of standard, which is that it will rotate and be fresh. So we knew this going in. We knew that this was going to be a potential problem if we wanted to have evergreen sets, and so we nerfed 12 cards from the basic and classic sets at the time of rotation. I think that we learned some things from that. One, I think it did have the desired effect of making standard feel very fresh at the first rotation, which is great. And two, that some of the feeling of those cards being nerfed meant that you couldn't play the decks that those cards were enabling in any format, Wild or Standard. So looking to the future, we're trying to figure out, A, are we still set up to succeed in Standard? Do we need to look at some cards to make sure that the meta feels fresh at our next Standard rotation when the next set comes out? And two, if we're not feeling good about that, what's the right way to handle it? Do we do things the way we did last time and nerf some cards? Or should we consider taking the cards as they are and putting them into the Wild format exclusively, like we did with Old Merc Guy at the first rotation? I think there's some pros and cons to both strategies, but this question is asking about, let's say we decided to do that second strategy and move cards to Wild. What about those cards in that first nerfing round that were enabling decks that are now not and still in Standard? And I guess I'm not sure. So there is, I think, cost every time we change something, right? If you took a break from Hearthstone before the nerfs and came back after the nerfs, and you weren't exposed to all of our blogs and in-game messaging about the nerfs, I think that's a pretty negative experience when your old decks kind of just have changed and you're surprised by it. So there's those kinds of costs. Also, just the total, which version of this is this card now? I think I don't know if you guys have this experience, but when I see Arcane Golem in Tavern Brawl or in Wild or in solo adventures, when it comes up out of a random effect, I see the art and I just know what that card does because I've played it 100 times. And I don't even read it now, and I can't attack with it when I play it. I'm like, wait, oh, that's right, we changed Arcane Golem. And you don't play it a bunch after you nerfed it because it's not the same card anymore. So that's an experience. That's actually the type of nerfing that I think has worked the worst for us when we nerf cards and change their soul so dramatically. And I think actually nerfs that worked out pretty well for us with things like Tuskar Totemic, where that card, if you don't realize it's nerfed, it almost doesn't even matter. Like, you just play the card, it's still some of the totem. Cost is the same, attack is the same, health is the same. I think that nerf worked out successfully for it. So all that is to say that cards like Molten Giant and Blade Flurry, at some point, there are some number of players who have only experienced the new version. For those players, we're changing it again. Some number of players were only played in the old version, and actually this would help them come back to Hearthstone if they come back and it's what they remember. So there's pros and cons. I think there's messaging we have to do to teach everybody these things that don't that I'm not sure is great. And also, for some of these cards, specifically Molten Giant and Blade Flurry, those are very powerful cards that had a huge effect on the meta. I'm not sure that makes Wild actually more fun. What would happen with Handlock and Blade Flurry Rogue running around in Wild? It's just one of those things that does that actually make Wild more fun? Is the meta better in Wild with those additions? I don't know. But it's something we'd have to figure out. So I'm not saying no. I'm not saying yes. It's a complicated decision. So it's and that's all predicated on whether or not we even consider this option in the first place. Okay, next question. Boar Control HS from Twitch chat.
Ooh.
Are you happy with how the meta has panned out post Mean Streets? We have 3 Patches decks on top, and then Kazakus decks close behind with no Paladin and Hunter. Dean, I'm going to let you talk about that.
All right. So let's give a short history of the Mean Streets metagame. Has been early on. There was a lot of experimentation the first couple days, and then it led to a ton of Pirate Warrior. Pirate Warrior was something like 30% of the metagame, and we're like, oh geez, like there's a lot of Pirate Warrior running around. But that fell off, quite substantially actually. Then the version of Pirates with Shaman started coming around with Jade cards, and then Rogue started popping up more recently. But in between there's a lot of Jade Druid, and then as a result of a lot of these really aggressive decks, a lot of the Reno decks started showing up. So there's been a ton of change, and when we look at that, that's great. It's like if something is very, very high population, that's okay as long as it's for a short amount of time. Now we're sort of reaching a point where at least the decks with the Pirate package, like the Warrior and the Shamans and the Rogues, those numbers are sort of stabilizing. They're stabilizing at a population that's a little bit higher than we're comfortable with. So I think that if it continues to be that way, I would expect us to do something about that. But change always happens. Like, change is happening to a smaller degree with those particular decks. With the Reno decks, there's been a lot more Priest lately and a lot more Mage. Whereas early on it was just sort of the Warlock decks running Reno, like in the first couple weeks there. So there's a lot of experimentation happening. There's a lot of different decks. So we are happy with that. The decks with the Pirate package, they tend to feel the same. The thing that you remember the most in our experience is what did they play in the first few turns of the game, and what did they play that finished the game. And even if there's 10 to 12 cards different, and I still feel like I'm losing to the same, 1 and 2 drop, or I still feel like I'm losing to the same win condition, those decks tend to feel so very much the same, and that's not something that we really like. We like everything to feel, much different when you're playing a different game versus a different deck. It should feel a lot different than, decks you've played in the past, especially if they're different classes. So I would say we're not as happy as we could be with the population of the decks with the Pirate package. So we're looking at that very, very closely. In terms of Paladin and Hunter, so one of the Paladin decks has actually been very successful statistically. So I think that there's room there for the Paladin to really see a lot more play. Rat Pack and Dispatch Kodo are actually really, really great on raid cards. I think that because Pirates have been so fast, and they're not Paladin and Hunter with the hand buffing can be a fast deck, but not as fast as some of the Pirates, and they can't really keep up with that. So I think if that sort of tapers off, those decks have a greater chance of being played. And also, I think hand buffing has a little bit more longevity than some of the other like Jade and the Reno decks. Like Reno's going to be leaving at some point, and a lot of the Jade cards, we're not likely to print more Jade cards in the next set. Whereas a lot of the hand buffing stuff, like buffing an Acolyte of Pain. Acolyte of Pain's from the classic set, but that scales really, really well. So I think in some of the following sets as well, I think a lot of the hand buffing stuff will, if you just have a high density of creatures in your hand, or you have cards like Acolyte of Pain, I think that those sorts of mechanics they're gonna see play a lot in the next sets as well. And I've seen players like VLPS having a lot of success with Control Warrior and using cards like Doppelgangster and buffing that up as a win condition. So I've been happy with a lot of the variability in decks. I think that Paladin and Hunter specifically have been seeing a low amount of play, but the future for them I think is pretty bright as long as the meta slows down a little bit. And a lot of that is to do with the Pirate package, and if the Pirate package continues to stay the way it is in terms of population, I think that we would step in and do something about it. But in general, I've been pretty happy. There's been a lot of different decks played. A lot of the Reno stuff is awesome. That's been a core mechanic of our set, and I think that a lot of people are playing those decks, which is really awesome. A lot of people are playing Dragon Priest. Versions of Miracle Rogue are very, very popular. So there's a lot of different stuff. Last time I checked the meta report, for our personal meta report, that is that the top deck and the 11th best deck, I think that there was a 52% to 49% win rate. So I think just in terms of balance specifically, I think that we're doing very, very well. But in terms of a lot of the decks feeling the same, I think that we could do a little bit better. So that's something that we're looking at very closely.
Sweet. Thank you, Dean. Next question here from Follow Onin from Twitter. With the second standard rotation coming up, has your stance on functionally reprinting cards changed at all? I'm not actually sure what our original stance was on that, so it's hard to say whether or not it's changed. I will say that there's to clear up some terminology here. There's the concept of reprinting, which is a funny term in a digital game, cards from sets that are in the wild, and there's the concept of functionally reprinting cards, which is basically means printing a card with a different name that has exactly the same everything else about it. So it'd be like if we printed Dr. Tentacles, who is a 7/7 for 7 who summoned 2 tentacle bots that damaged 1 to 4.
That's pretty sweet.
So that's a functional reprint. And in Wild, what that means is you can actually play 2 Dr. Booms because they have different names. So, we haven't talked very much about either of those things. I think there's a potential upside to a very rare reprint or functional reprint. I guess we haven't really talked almost at all about functional reprints, but I don't think it hasn't been quite enough time since some of the cards have entered the wild, and I think you'd have to choose the exact right moment. And I think that the times when a reprint might feel good is when a card, when in its original standard format, had a certain context, and then you take that card and you say, okay, now in this standard format, it's the same card, but it feels totally different and plays totally differently. I think that is potentially interesting. So, and I don't know, we haven't run into those kinds of issues yet, and I just don't know if that's even a good idea, even if that's true. But I certainly don't think that we've talked enough really about either of those things. Okay, next question. Dark Scoots from Twitch chat. How do you balance designing for new players and for more experienced players? Ideally, we balance it very well. But if you're talking about card balance, there was something we saw early on in Hearthstone's history was that Hunter was by far the best deck at like ranks 25 to 15 or something. This is back before Naxxramas. Before launch, actually. This is way, way back. And it was, I think, by far the worst deck at the top of the ladder. It was, or close to it. So that's a tough balance problem, right? Because newbies are getting just stomped consistently by Hunter. And at the top end, the ladder is not as diverse as it could be because we're not seeing Hunter anywhere. So that was an issue. One of the ways we tried to solve it back then was essentially to create more skill testing cards for Hunter. If the Hunter cards are harder to play and potentially more powerful, then the great players, their win rates will increase. And because they're hard to play, bad players will start to do a little bit worse. So that's one thing that we can do to if the curve is very far off. In other cases, that's kind of been the opposite of that, where decks are very, very, very hard to play, like Patron Warrior, and the win rates at the very top end were much higher than anywhere else in the ladder. Patron Warrior was one of the worst decks for some big percentage of the lower end of the ladder. It is tough, and I think that the most important thing, though, is that there is a variety, and that we do have a good variety of skill testing decks at the top end.
Right. I think that something that we really try hard to do when we're making a new set is making sure that there's a lot of these high skill cap decks. So we have a ton of decks where you're playing creatures, and it's great to have decks where what's my biggest creature that I have in my hand? What's the most powerful looking thing that I have in my hand? What's the best idea what is the best thing for me to do here? Play that creature. I think it's great to have those kinds of decks. Not every deck can be Miracle Rogue or Freeze Mage or Patron Warrior, but at the same time, it's really important to have those decks as well. I think that something we've been trying to do recently is make Rogue and Priest sort of the decks that are more reactive. Just in general, reactive decks are slightly harder to play whenever you're playing a deck where you're holding cards in your hands and the answer is, I'm going to wait and not play these. So those decks are really, really hard to play. So when we're making a bunch of different decks, we're trying to make sure we have a lot of different things that are not as difficult to play, where you don't need to understand all the nuances of Hearthstone and all, everything about the metagame. And we also have decks where if you are an extremely high-skilled player, you can take advantage of that particular archetype. So it's really important for us to have both of those kinds of decks to really go after different types of players and what they enjoy.
All right, next question from Wild Mongrel on the blog post. Hello guys, can you share how big Team 5 is now? Can you describe your usual workday? So Team 5 is over 70 people. I think we will probably grow significantly larger than that over the course of the next couple of years. And this is essentially a doubling in size, I think, every year since we launched. So we've been growing dramatically.
How big was the team when you started?
It was like 2, maybe.
I started 2.5 years ago, and the team was, I think, 25 people or something like that. So it's grown significantly.
Can you describe your usual workday? So my usual workday is I come into work and I get some coffee, and then we sometimes start with a meeting about kind of just what's the global community looking like, what's going on, what things are we missing, what do we need to talk about that's kind of a pressing issue. Then we do a team stand-up. The whole team gets together and we talk about, okay, what's going on with the next patch, and the patch after that, and the patch after that, and the patch after that. What do we do last week? How did we do against our goals last week? What are our goals for this week, and how are we going to approach that? This lets everybody kind of get a sense of what's coming, what do I need to be aware of. We do what's called sometimes a Pechakucha, where we're a big team now, so we know each other like very well inside of work, but what are we like outside of work? What's our history? And so somebody gets up and does a 15 or 20 minute presentation about their life and where they came from, and show some baby pictures and tell some stories. It's super fun. It brings the whole team closer together. And then we sometimes, like Thursdays, we do a big team play test. So somebody chooses like what on the design team, like, hey, this is something we need feedback on. It's the next set, or it's a new tavern brawl, or we're trying out some new thing in the arena. So the whole team jumps on, plays it, gives tons of feedback. We make a lot of changes based on that feedback. Then we have some lunch. And in the afternoon, often for me, I meet with all the different designers, talk about what they're working on, how I can help blow down barriers or make connections with the rest of the team. Sometimes we meet with groups like the Blizzard animation team, who do the incredible cinematics for upcoming expansions. We meet with the community team and talk about issues that are going on in the community. And just kind of different groups that are all working on Hearthstone throughout the company. And then sometimes we have some fun meetings talking about card design and all that. Now, my day is more meeting focused than a lot of people, so I don't know if your day is pretty different.
Shorter than that, but my day is usually lots of playtesting, lots of coordinating with teams like engineering and art, and people working on the set that's coming next, and the people that's working on the set that's coming after that, and making sure that we're all sort of on the same page. We're a very collaborative design team, so even the people working on something different than I'm working on, I'm giving a lot of input there, and they're bringing a lot of input back. So just trying to be, involved in a lot of different things and giving feedback wherever we can, and making sure, for me particularly, I work mostly on cards. So making sure the card designs are fun, and finding, what decks that they go in, and making sure that when they do enter the metagame, like what's going to happen there. And conversing with my boss and lots of different people to make sure that that's on the right track. So lots of playing Hearthstone is what I do.
Question from the Hearthhead community: did you have any specific decks or purposes in mind when designing cards like Weasel Tunneler, or is it more like, let's see what the community can do with this?
I think it's mostly the latter. I think we make a lot of fun cards where I think with Weasel Tunneler, in a deck where Weasel Tunneler works, you're putting, tons of Weasel Tunnelers in your deck, in your opponent's deck, and then all they draw is Weasel Tunnelers. So, I don't think that's a deck that we want to be like the meta-defining, deck where everyone's just drawing Weasel Tunnelers all game. But it's fine when someone creates a deck where they try to make that trigger happen like 5 or 6 times. I think when you read a card like that, just the fact that we're getting a question about that card at all makes me think that it's accomplishing its goal. Like, oh, this is a fun and interesting card where I'm going to try to figure out something to do with it. I think that it probably shouldn't be the most popular or most powerful deck, but we just have a lot of cards that just are fun for people to figure out different things to do with and just have a good time.
All right. From Levi1147 from Twitter, what do you guys consider a healthy meta, and how do you measure it, and what warning signs would alert you if it wasn't healthy?
We look at a ton of different metrics. A lot of it is feel. We play, everyone plays a ton of Hearthstone. Like, we're playing hundreds and hundreds of games a month, basically everybody. So getting a good gauge from what's going on from the community, what we feel personally, what we feel when we're talking to each other. We use a ton of metrics as well. Something that I look at consistently is every time we get a report on the metagame, like what not necessarily is the highest win rate. Like, in the history of Hearthstone, there's been very, very few decks that have ever eclipsed the win rate that is, I would consider dangerous, like something over like 55% even. That's happened very, very rarely. But what does happen sometimes is the population of decks increase to an amount that's like 20-25%. And that's really counter to a lot of our goals, where we want you to queue up on Ladder and Tavern Brawl and in Constructed. We want you to have a different experience. We don't want you to just feel like you're doing the same thing over and over again. So a lot of times we're looking at population at different ranks. Like, we have the ability to look at what's going on in Legend, what's going on from ranks 1 to 5, what's going on at rank 20. When I queue into those experiences, am I experiencing something different? A lot of times when I queue in.
Or like, what's specifically Sixo playing? Like, what's he playing?
Oh, yeah.
What's his win rate with each deck?
Also that as well. That doesn't really correlate to a healthy metagame, but it is nice to see that. So when things are getting to too high of a population, I think that's when we consider, like, there's something wrong here. Maybe we could step in. When we change things like Undertaker, I mean, it was because between Warlock and Hunter, there's like 40% of games were Undertaker Hunter, and while that deck was powerful, the bigger problem was the population size. So I think that's really the biggest thing that we look at in terms of healthy meta. Are there a lot of decks being played? Does it feel different when I'm playing games?
And those are correlated, right? The better the win percentage, the more likely people are to jump on that train and play that deck. There is some counter to that, which is that as the deck gets more popular, people are playing cards that are very good against that deck and it can bring the win rate back down. With Undertaker Hunter, that there wasn't enough cards, I think, in the meta that were very good against that tech even. So I think it's a little bit on us to make sure there are cards in the meta that are playable. If there is a deck that is starting to run rampant, that you could feel like, okay, I'm smart, I'm paying attention, I can tune my deck against that. So that's something that we need to continue to do to make those kinds of tools.
Right. There's examples of that, like, fairly recently. Like, the population of Aggro Warrior was extremely high, like higher or just as high as any deck has basically ever been in Hearthstone for a couple days, and then people started playing more of the Kazakis and Reno decks and putting Doomsayers and Acidic Swampoos and stuff in their deck, and the population size of that deck moved drastically. And that's really healthy for us, for there to be something that's very powerful, and then the community sort of figures it out on their own, which is more of an organic meta shift rather than us saying, oh, this is too powerful, let us, we'll come in and stomp on this. We'd much rather things shift on their own and players figure out different ways, because there are all these tools, and that's really the goal that we have.
All right. Kabloey from Twitch chat. What card from Mean Streets has been the most surprising from internal testing to how it is being utilized now?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I don't know exactly. We did a lot of play testing, so a lot of things. I guess one of the most surprising things is how well some things worked out. I guess this isn't really going to answer this question, but when we tested Cthulhu, like the Cocoon Aviana Cthulhu Druid, that's the kind of deck that we test a ton, because when you're essentially one-shotting your opponent, that's something that's a little bit worrisome for us. So when we printed Coon, we just said, well, there's an Aviana combo and there's a Malagos combo, and like how powerful is that? Like, it's a fun thing to do, but if it becomes too popular, if it's too strong, then I would consider that something very bad. You're just like holding all these cards back and then destroying your opponent, doing 50 damage.
Out of the hand with nothing in the battlefield.
Right,
Yeah.
right. But it is super fun to think about. It's super fun to build. So like, how do you strike a balance between like, we want this to be exactly this tier of deck. Any better or any worse is a big problem. But it was such a fun thing that we put in a ton of time in testing that particular deck, and I think it got to a point where it almost got to the point where it was being played a lot, and then it's like, oh, it's not quite good enough. So I think it was surprising how well that worked out. I guess the population of the pirate decks was not, I would say, unexpected, but how well that really worked out in Shaman, Warrior, and Rogue. Versus, like, we knew it was a very strong Warrior deck, but mixing all the Jade things in with Pirates, I think was slightly stronger than we anticipated. So that was, like, slightly surprising. Patches appearing everywhere was kind of in those 3 decks with weapon classes. I consider that a win. I mean, if you're with Small Time Buccaneer and Patches, and you're playing those in 3 different decks that have weapons, then that's great for us. I think the power level might be slightly too high. But in terms of like where those cards are getting played, I think that's great.
All right, Messner C from Twitter, are you satisfied with the current state of Wild? I think there's some stuff that we could do better with Wild. I think one of the things that is going to be best for Wild is the next standard rotation. Right now, Wild is 2 sets off from standard. There's not. Some of the cards in those sets are pretty impactful, but it'll be 5 sets off from Wild in the upcoming rotation as 1 new set gets added to Standard and Wild, and 3 new sets leave the Standard format. So to me, that's very exciting. I think there are lots of decks and strategies that will be only achievable in Wild, and I think that'll increase the demand for more Wild type stuff in the community. Which means we probably need to do more Wild type things on our end. I really hope, and I was kind of surprised not to see more of this, I hope to see we've seen a lot of great community events over the last year. Firebat through some incredible tournaments, and we've seen other really exciting tournaments throughout the community. I was hoping to see a little bit more Wild stuff, but there hasn't been a lot of that kind of activity. So maybe that's something that we need to do more of to kind of spark some of that. I do think, though, that as the demand for cool Wild stuff goes up, as the Wild gets more different, that will hopefully encourage some of that stuff. But I think we'll see what happens after this next rotation. I think it'll be such a different experience that hopefully it really feels like 2 unique formats that are totally legit. I mean, we're seeing a lot of players playing in Wild. I think probably more than people would expect. It's not like 10% of the numbers of players who are playing in Standard. It's like I don't know. Standard maybe is like twice as popular as Wild or something like that. I haven't looked at the numbers recently. So it's there are players playing Wild, and there are players hitting Legend in Wild and all that. So I think that there's some success there. And we'll see how things change. I think it will change dramatically after the next rotation.
Yeah, metagame-wise, things, even though the sets actually aren't too much different, like Ben was saying, there's only Nax and Goblins versus Gnomes that are different, but the Wild metagame has been shifting a lot recently. Like the introduction of Kazakis alone has made a lot of people play a version of the Kazakis and Reno deck in Wild, which is much, much different than the version that people are playing in Standard. I think that there's a lot of times there's 10, 11 cards different because a lot of the cards in Naxxramas and Goblins vs. None are quite powerful. I think that I saw some concern about, there's cards like Paladin Shredder and Dr. Boom, and aren't you guys concerned about the Wild balance? Like, why aren't these cards being changed? I think that over time, as the card pool gets bigger, you're just going to see the really powerful decks in Wild are the decks that have a ton of synergy and not necessarily the decks that are just playing a bunch of powerful standalone cards. So I think that Ben's right when the next rotation happens and the 2 formats are much, much different and one experience is much different than the other. I think that'll do a lot of things for the population of Wild and people having more fun. And when, I'm done with Standard for the day. I've played a bunch of Constructed. Right now, when going to play Wild, it's not necessarily that different of an experience, whereas I think when it becomes a much different experience, it'll become a mode that you're more excited to play.
All right. From Time Bandit. Hi, Ben Brode. I'm the guy who accidentally sent you my linguistics book. First off, thanks for sending it back. This is very appreciated. Now, what did you actually learn from it, except that there's a page 477 in it? So the whole team wrote all over Time Bandit's book, and I changed all the periods to commas, and on the first page, not in the whole book. And then we took it around campus and posed with it and took pictures. So it was a lot of fun. Thank you for lending us your linguistics book. I didn't get a chance to read all the chapters, so please send it back. Okay, next question. At KMT from Twitter says, are you concerned by some wording inconsistency? Do you plan to rewrite old cards? The short answer is yes and yes. So we have been doing it. So in a lot of patches, I think basically every major expansion release, we've gone back and edited wordings, changed punctuation on overload cards. We've even also reflowed the way that text flows to reduce orphans or just to make things more readable. I tend to like to see when it's like +2 attack. Like I like it when it's +2 attack on the same line, not +2 with an attack on the next line. So I'm actually very picky about this stuff. It matters a lot to me and to a lot of the team. So we have been changing a lot of that stuff. I think recently there's been a big example with Druid of the Claw. I did make a video a long time ago explaining why it wasn't more consistent with the Druid cards in the past. We've had discussions about that recently. Do you know the current status of Druid of the Claw?
I do not personally. I know that we have a guy named Ryan Masterson. You guys know him as Reels. He's super passionate about this stuff. I think he's back at his desk right now working on templates, making sure there's no orphaned words, and the new set that's coming out. So I think that we're dedicating a lot of time to making sure a lot of these text boxes look the way they should, and also that they're consistent with past and present things in the set. So I think it's something that we're looking at and taking seriously.
I have not been involved recently in those conversations, but I know they've happened. So we'll kind of take a look and see where we're at with that. But I don't disagree that that's potentially a better direction for Druid of the Claw. I do think I should say that I think that consistency is better. It's better if cards are consistent. But unlike physical games, I don't think it's the prime concern. An example is a card like Ysera, who you just if you were playing that card let's say we made physical Hearthstone and you drew that card, you were like, okay, get a dream card. What does that mean? I can't play the game anymore. Like we have to stop, or we have to go get Google and figure out how to what the text actually means. So that isn't an issue. It means we can make cards like Fireball that just say deal 6 damage. To what? What do you like? So you don't have to say any of that. We just highlight the possible targets, right? So I think that being ultra clear on the cards, when we can do it and it doesn't have other drawbacks, that's really important. We should do it. But sometimes there are other drawbacks. There are other things that we think, there's some, if we made it exactly the same, it reads crappily. There's 18 lines of text. Let's just come up with some other way to say it. As long as it parses very easily, you read it one time and you get it and you understand how it's supposed to work, or your intuition kind of gets you there. I think that's very important too, and usually that all aligns. Usually we make cards consistent and parsable and all the other things that we're looking for. Sometimes that breaks down, and we just say, okay, normally triggers say whenever blank happens, comma, do X. But then sometimes we say, this destroys minions that it damages, and you're like, okay, I get it. I don't need you to write it the same way we've written every other card. That's much more parsable. It's easier to get from what you're trying to say to what it actually means. And so sometimes we sort things slightly differently. It's just a kind of a card by card basis, and when we think how much we gain from consistency versus how much we gain from some of the other things that can fight against it. Okay. Ornarok from the blog asks, can you talk about your design goals for the Paladin class? Paladin identity seems unclear, and I would love to know Blizzard's thoughts on what it should do and where it goes from here.
Sure, I can talk about that. Paladin itself is... Paladin has 2 different things that we sort of go for. There's... we're very good at healing. They have cards like Ragnar's Lightlord and Forbidden Healing, and cards that we continue to make where they can get to later stages of the game fairly easily, or easier than other classes can. And also they have their hero power, which is summon a Silver Hand Recruit. So in general, we've had a lot of different Paladin decks that either go very long game and use stuff like Equality and Consecrate and Heal and sort of survive until they can play some of these giant minions like, Tyrion and Ragnar's Lightlord. Or we have another version of Paladin decks that's I summon all of my Silver Hand Recruits, and then I go to battle with these tiny guys and buffs. And so I think with Paladin we do more buffs than we do in any other class. Cards like Blessing of Kings and cards like that are cards that you're likely to see in sets going forward. So cards that synergize with if I am buffed, maybe I am better than the average card being buffed. Cards that synergize with cards like Blessing of King, and just more later game cards that help Paladin heal. So I think that when Reno rotates out specifically, Paladin will be one of the classes that's going to be the best at healing again. So I think that there's a lot of room for Paladin to be very successful when that comes around. And also, I think in the future that we'll continue to do stuff that deal with Silver Hand Recruits, deal with buffing, and also deal with healing. And that's sort of the identity for Paladin.
All right, another question here. And I gotta say, I don't know if this is a sample bias because we're getting the questions that are like this and not all the questions they're asking. But there aren't a lot of questions being asked about, hey, when are you going to implement X feature that I think would be cool? And that's helpful because a lot of the times, like we can't talk about this thing that we're not ready to announce, or is far enough in the future that we haven't discussed a lot of things yet. So I appreciate not asking us questions that the only possible answer from us is a non-answer. We're excited about, we have a lot of stuff coming. 2017 is an exciting year for Hearthstone, but it's harder to answer those kinds of questions in a format like this where we're not just going to announce everything. Right?
Yeah, this format's more about like communication. Like, what are the hot topics? What are the questions that you guys have been asking? How can we give some insight into that, and how can we collect feedback from you guys rather than this is the next expansion, or like this is the next feature that we're releasing. So especially if we do this more and more often. We announced some stuff today, but I mean, imagine in a world where we did this every week or every 2 weeks, we're not going to be able to have like the next feature that we're releasing every time we do this. So it's good for us to have sort of an open line of communication and be on places like Reddit and Twitter, and also do stuff like this that's wider reaching. So I think that setting the expectation where we're just having a conversation about Hearthstone and addressing some of these topics that you guys are concerned about, I think is what you can expect from things like this in the future.
All right, I'm being told that we're running right up against time, so I wanted to kind of close things out by talking a little bit about this whole thing. Do you guys like this, right? Do you feel like this is valuable? Does it help knowing how we feel about things, even when we're not communicating announcements and action plans? In these in-between times where we're not ready to announce something, but we think it's important to have a conversation and a dialogue, do you like this format? Do you like live video Q&As? Let us know what you thought about this whole thing. Let us know if there's any specific answers that we gave that you think are just the wrong things for us to be doing. We're not going to make everybody happy, and we're not going to always make the right decision. We're going to make some mistakes. So it's a little tough to kind of sift through it and figure out, okay, really, based on this feedback, where do we go from here? But it's very important. It is a thing that we use as one of our primary inputs for deciding what to do on Hearthstone and how to make decisions. So please let us know how you felt. Let us know in general senses of making threads on our forums, on Reddit, or you can let us know personally. Our Twitter handles are right there, how you felt about all of this. So, Play Hearthstone on Twitter is a good place for community feedback. They also compile all that and send it to us as well. So we'll see all of it. We'll read all of it. And that will wrap it up for our first ever Hearthstone live Q&A. How did it feel?
It was fun, yeah, and also, like Ben said, feel free to leave feedback on any of the answers that we gave as well. Hopefully we can give added context to those if anyone is upset with any of those answers. But it was great. I'm really glad to have done this. So.
I clicked the button too early, Dean. There it is.
Oh, no. Oh, what is this?
Thanks for joining us, guys. Bye.